So, tell me about how the pandemic has impacted your preaching and teaching.
Yeah. So, what was interesting is that I think every pastor probably felt this in some way, is that early on, you think things happen within world events and stuff, or even local events where a pastor feels hard pressed not to talk about it,
Sure.
right? And so obviously when the pandemic started, I remember that very first Sunday we went live from my iPhone. Again, everything was different. We had to sort of reevaluate everything we were doing that Sunday.
Mhm.
And my sermon that Sunday was almost even more of a homily reflection,
Mm.
and it was really just focused on where we were and what was going on.
Mhm.
And so there was definitely that period throughout the pandemic where I think I felt more of that need to be incorporating those realities of what people are feeling and experiencing and all that. But
And
what's been interesting is that as it's going on, I think, at least for me, but I feel like for other people too, you get to the point where you just don't want to hear anything more
mm,
about it.
mhm.
And I think, it's a good opportunity for us as pastors, at least, to think, what are we supposed to be preaching and teaching, and what are we focused on?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, we're not preaching on the pandemic. We're preaching
Mhm.
on Jesus, right? We're
Yeah.
preaching on what he's done for us and who he is for us, and how that impacts our lives certainly connects to things with the pandemic, of
Mhm.
course. But at the end of the day, on Sundays and whenever we're preaching to our congregations, we're there to preach Jesus. And so I definitely found myself slowly but surely moving away from, feeling the need to incorporate everything about the pandemic, and just
Yeah.
really getting back to just preach Jesus, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, those opportunities present themselves to incorporate, world events or what
Yeah.
have you. But
Yeah.
you don't want to become just where every Sunday sounds like it's just another word about what's going on in the pandemic.
Sure.
People just need the gospel. They need to know that their sins are forgiven. They need to know who God is, even in the midst of whatever's going on in their
Mhm.
life, right? And so just trying to focus more on that as things have progressed. So
So as complication went up, the gospel became easier to proclaim. Is
hmm.
that a fair reflection?
Yeah. So, I've been thinking about this. I've watched a few other of the conversations you've
Mhm.
had and stuff, and thinking about that reality. And I think what was very interesting for the church and for pastors is that, so the pandemic, what do you do with it? How do we preach it? How do we talk about it? What does it look like? And yeah, it's like some of the other things that have happened on a more of a national level, right? Where in the very beginning, I think the pandemic creates a great opportunity for people to hear the gospel that normally would have just not been interested, right? So the pandemic brings about this true sense of our mortality,
Yeah.
this sense of how things really are out of our control,
Mhm.
how we all the things we take for granted are suddenly brought to light, and so it all of a sudden makes the gospel very fresh to people, and
Mhm.
it makes them a little more willing and eager to hear it. And
Mhm.
so you have that initial time where you're just like, hey, people are really, they're ready to hear this, right? They're ready to hear the gospel. Nothing about the gospel changes, and that's what's so amazing about it, is that nothing about the gospel
Mhm.
changes. It's still the same thing,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden people are just a little more in tune, or looking to hear it. And then sure enough, as things go on, we sort of settle back into the, same ways and the same thoughts and all that. And,
Mhm.
you find people putting their hope in all these other things again, whether it's new leadership or new plans or a vaccine or whatever. And, before you know it, you're right back to feeling like, people are sort of desensitized themselves to
Mhm.
the gospel again.
Mhm.
But the whole time, the gospel remains, and we keep
Yeah.
we keep proclaiming the same thing. And so it's just an interesting dynamic, for I think, for pastors to experience and to walk
Mhm.
through.
Yeah.
And I think you have to remind yourself as a pastor that what I'm doing really doesn't change, but things around us are constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting thing to experience for sure.
Did you um, did you pick up any new ways of engaging with your people? So we talked about the connection of worship. We haven't been able to hug anybody, shake anybody's hand, or even get into those regular gatherings, the midweek Bible studies, the Sunday morning breakfast, the Saturday
Right.
morning breakfast. Did you do anything to, I guess, engage more with the members of your congregation?
I mean, we certainly did more in terms of just our online presence, especially more early on when we were literally not doing anything in person,
Yeah.
so we were trying to offer more online Bible study
Mhm.
opportunities, just weekly devotional thought, things like that. So we were doing a lot more of that early
Okay.
on. But, what's been, I think, very challenging for ministry staff, is, and not everyone realizes this, but, throughout this pandemic, I think we're just tired.
Mhm.
And I have found that throughout this year, it's been, I'd call it a different kind of stress, so
Okay.
it's not a stress of just being busy or having a lot on your plate or what have you, but I would say there's definitely sort of a decision burnout, right? You're
Oh,
just
uh-huh.
burned out from having to make decisions and
Yeah.
trying to navigate through this. I would say you're experiencing a tiredness in just such an emotional way,
Yeah.
because you feel so restricted. You can't do the things you want to do. You're
Mhm.
struggling to do the things you are doing.
Mhm.
You look at your congregation, and only about half are actively there, and you're trying to figure out how to stay connected to the other half. And
Yeah.
and I think it's just been very tiring. And so early on, it's like that. I think I think a lot of people almost felt a boost in energy,
Mhm.
like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a new
Right.
challenge. Like,
That 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 an
let's
adrenaline hit.
yeah, and you're like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And like, I think everyone was sort of like boosted for a little while with that adrenaline, and then you crash,
Mhm.
and and all of a sudden you realize that we're now a year into this,
Mhm.
and you're just tired.
Yeah.
You feel like you don't know how to initiate new things because
Mhm.
you're just trying to keep the things going. I've always hated the terminology maintenance ministry,
Oh, uh-huh.
and that gets thrown around, and
Yeah.
pastors get criticized,
Yeah.
when
Why?
they're
How do that's I think I know where you're going.
sure.
So talk about the negative way that maintenance ministry gets used, and then go where you're going to go with it for being so tired. So what's the negative way maintenance
Okay,
ministry gets
so
used?
yeah, so the negative way is that pastor gets categorized into he only does what he has to do.
Mhm.
He sort of gets by with the bare bones kind of thing, and he's just he preaches on Sunday and prepares worship. He leads a Bible study. He visits if someone really needs to visit. Sort of, that's the end. He's just sort of maintaining what we already have existing. But if we want the church to grow, we need to do more than just maintain what we're doing. And that's unfortunate that some people get lumped into that unfairly and things like that,
Yeah.
right? But in terms of this last year, especially, I think in a lot of ways we were sort of forced to just focus on maintaining, because so much had been stripped away and so much had been changed and restricted.
Mhm.
A lot of what we're trying to do is just maintain
Mhm.
those key pieces of, of,
Mhm.
of what makes us the church.
Yeah.
And that, again, I sort of alluded to it earlier. I mean, that could often make you feel like, am I doing my job?
Mhm.
Am I doing enough? Should I be doing more?
Mhm.
And that's again, back to that being stressed and exhausted in a new
Yeah.
way. That has been very stressful and exhausting,
Mhm.
because I've never felt like, I don't want to be just like a maintenance ministry kind of idea. You want to be thinking of new things and leading towards new opportunities, but a lot of this situation, we've just sort of had to try to maintain what we're doing,
Yeah.
and that's been such a new challenge to
Mhm.
walk through, that I think it's taken its toll on ministry people across the board. So
So if